Hello. So, in this video, we're going to talk about Joseph Sargent's film Jaws: The Revenge, with the famous tagline, "This time it's personal." So one of my favorite things about Jaws: The Revenge is that it's not Jaws 4, because titling it Jaws 4 would suggest a continuity of the franchise from Jaws 3D or Jaws 3, depending on whether you saw it in 3D or 2D. And this film has basically just ignored the existence of Jaws 3, which in some ways is quite a good thing because it is, I would say, the weakest film of the franchise. But it is quite striking that they just pretend that Jaws 3D never happened. The characters of Mike Brody and Sean Brody are completely different in this film than they were in the previous film. In the previous film, Sean Brody had been so traumatized by his near-death encounters with sharks that he had moved to Colorado and essentially refused... Sorry, I'm battling an illness that I'm hoping is on the way out. Then he basically just sort of refuses to go in the water. That is his trauma response to the events of Jaws 2, which is a fair response. In this film, Jaws: The Revenge, he has become an Amity Island deputy following in his father's footsteps, though Martin Brody has died of a heart attack. And he's quite happy. Well, he's not happy about it, but he's not happy about it because it's Christmas and he wants to go with his family, not because... so he has to go out on a boat at the very beginning of the film and basically detach some floating debris from a buoy, during which time he is killed by a great white shark. So, if we take the whole franchise across the 4 films, this is the 4th once-in-a-lifetime encounter that this particular family has had with sharks, with great white sharks. If we ignore Jaws 3 and just take this sort of Jaws: The Revenge as the alternate timeline, this is still the 3rd once-in-a-lifetime encounter that this family has had with great white sharks. So, John gets killed almost immediately in the movie, and Ellen Brody, this triggers not necessarily a mental breakdown, but it triggers this sort of deep-seated anxiety that a shark, or sharks, possibly, but really she seems to think it's a shark, is hunting her family because Martin Brody killed the original shark in Jaws, and then possibly also the shark in Jaws 2. It's not real clear exactly how Ellen's logic works beyond the sort of broad brushstrokes of a shark is hunting my family, and she blames the shark for Martin's death, even though he died of a heart attack, as Sean points out early in the movie, prior to his death. But she blames the shark nonetheless for driving Martin through stress, through whatever it is, to this heart attack. And then, of course, the shark kills Sean, and so that's a very direct sort of link there. And so Ellen becomes convinced that basically their family is the target of some sort of... Either she thinks this is basically like a ghost shark that keeps coming back to try and finish them off. It's the ghost of original Jaws. Or she thinks this is some sort of, conspiracy of sharks where other sharks are coming to try and take revenge for Jaws, Bernie, Mama Jaws, and Junior Jaws, or just Jaws and Bernie, if we're in the alternate timeline. So I call as a reminder, I call the shark from the original film Jaws. I call the shark from Jaws 2 Bernie because his face gets all burned up. Its face, her face, I don't know. It's all burned up pretty much right at the beginning. And then Mama Jaws and Baby Jaws are the two sharks from Jaws 3D. So Ellen is convinced of this, and then she is persuaded by Michael, her now only surviving family member, along with Carla Brody, Michael's wife, and their kid. Thea. They persuade her to go down with them to the Bahamas, where Michael is working on his doctorate in, I think, marine biology. And so in this case, he's quite a different character from the Mike Brody of Jaws 3D. Mike Brody is an engineer in Jaws 3D, and he is dating a marine biologist, but he himself makes very clear that he is not a marine biologist. Here, Mike Brody is, along with his friend Jake, working toward becoming a marine biologist. And basically, they are working on this project of sort of tagging sea snails. That's what the nature of their study is. That's what they have funding for, etc., etc. Carla is an artist. She's creating a large sculpture to represent the spirit of the people of the Bahamas. And when a great white shark appears, Mike Brody is basically like, let's not mess with that thing. My family has a long history of really bad stuff happening when sharks come around. But Jake is like, no, man, we got to study this. Great white sharks don't come to the Bahamas because the water is too warm. So we've got to study this one while we've got the opportunity. That's going to be much more interesting research than sea snails. So basically they attempt to sort of pursue this great white shark for scientific ends. And Mike, of course, knows not to tell his mother about this because she's already concerned about him being in the water, about him doing science underwater. She is convinced that a shark will kill him. In the Bahamas, Ellen has a sort of mixed bag of a time. On the one hand, she is hanging out a lot with Hoagie, he's played by Michael Caine, who obviously is an amazing actor. He's great in everything he does. And Hoagie is this sort of roguish, small plane pilot who he's a bit of a sort of he presents himself as sort of an adventurer and like a world traveler, this very sort of restless guy who's been around and seen and done all these things and dated all these women and whatever it is. But he very much seems to have genuine affection for Ellen, or to develop genuine affection for Ellen Brody, which Mike is ambivalent about. And he becomes very sort of skeptical of Hoagie and his intentions toward Mike's mother. At the same time, as Ellen is having a pretty good time with Hoagie, somewhat reluctant to sort of embrace his desire to properly be in a relationship with her. At the same time, she is dealing with these almost hallucinations, these sort of vivid nightmares, and this sort of deep anxiety that a shark is coming for her family. And when later in the movie, Jake and Mike have put some tracking software on the shark, and so theoretically they can keep track of its movements, but the equipment keeps cutting in and out. At some point late in the movie, the shark shows up basically at the beach where Carla's statue is being unveiled and where Thea is playing in the water, and the shark basically goes right after this large inflatable thing that Thea is on. Again, reinforcing this idea that Ellen has that this shark is specifically coming after their family. And it had several times sort of ignored Jake in the water to go after Mike. So Ellen basically snaps. She steals Mike and Jake's research boat. She goes out into the ocean, and she's basically like, I'm going to take this shark out. It's game on. Game on, shark. You're done. She doesn't seem to really have a plan for how she's going to take this shark out, but it does seem to be a one of us is not walking away from this fight type mentality. Mike and Jake are like, what? No, we can't do this. And so they get Hoagie to like fly them out. Hoagie also is keen on going and trying to save Ellen, to try and find Ellen and stop her from probably getting killed by a shark. And so they go out, and you have this sort of big climactic battle with the shark, in which Hoagie's plane gets destroyed, and they're all on the boat. It seems like Hoagie himself might have been killed, but then he pops up and is like, "Oh, I survived! Pull me up on the boat!" And all of the sort of, you know, the standard sort of Jaws, the shark fight taking a long time bit. Jake rigs up this thing that he thinks is going to basically like electronically disrupt the shark's biomechanical functions from within. If they can get it into the shark, which means the shark has to basically eat it. They managed to do that successfully, but then they're having difficulty like getting the thing to properly function. The shark seemingly kills Jake, and then eventually it is in the process of destroying the ship. But Ellen rams the ship into the shark, and as a bowsprit, which is the bit off the front of the ship, that has been broken off when the shark took Jake, and she rams this into the shark, which I guess sort of reacts with the electronic device inside it and blows up. Again, they love blowing up sharks in the Jaws franchise. It is a questionable thing. Don't blow up sharks. It's a bad thing, generally speaking. These are films. These are fiction, but don't blow up sharks. Bad thing to do. #woke. And then the ship basically explodes and sinks, and they all are bobbing around in the wreckage. And then Jake pops up, and he's like, "Oh, I'm not dead. I'm just horribly mauled because I got bit by this shark, basically across my entire abdomen." And then they're like, "Wow, happy ending." Um, and then Ellen and Hoagie go back to Amity Island at the end of the film, presumably to live happily ever after in the no more so far subsequent Jaws movie. So it is an interesting movie. It's definitely not as good as Jaws, or I would say even Jaws 2, but it's head and shoulders above Jaws 3D. Um, the the strange, interesting thing about it is that sort of notion of the shark pursuing the Brody family, and the sort of question about whether or not that is reality or whether or not that's just Ellen's sort of delusion or paranoia, which is really unresolved in the film. Right? I mean, we don't know the shark's intention in Jaws: The Revenge, and so we don't know whether this happens to just be a weird freak thing that occurs over and over to the Brody family, or whether this shark sort of sets out with an intentionality to come along and destroy this family for reasons. We simply don't know. The film doesn't answer it, and that's kind of an interesting thing on some level.